John Deans is with us. He is with the Arctic campaign of Greenpeace USA. No, not the guy who was in the Nixon administration. And in fact, there's an S on the end here. Twitter at John Deans or at Greenpeace USA. The website, of course, greenpeace.org/USA. Hey, John, welcome to the program.
Hey, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Royal Dutch Shell is dancing into the Alaskan Arctic, and they're just a little piece of it. You are on this Arctic thing, and you've got this the Greenpeace film Black Ice. There's going to be a special showing tonight on Free Speech TV for Pledge Week, so be sure and check that out. That freespeech.org. If you don't have Free Speech TV on Dish or Direct or through your local cable system, but if you do, there it is. So, John, tell me about Black Ice.
Yeah, Black Ice documents the happenings of about a year ago. Greenpeace has been working for many years now to confront Arctic oil drilling. The Arctic is melting because of climate change, and oil companies responsible for climate change, rather than heed that as a warning, are seeing it as an opportunity to go and extract more hydrocarbons and put our Arctic at risk of oil spills. So about a year ago, our ship, the Arctic Sunrise, went to confront a Russian oil platform operated by Gazprom. And as a part of that action, we had climbers who attempted to scale the oil rig. And from then on, the Russian Coast Guard responded in an incredibly dangerous and aggressive way. Warning shots fired into the water direct from pistols that had previously been pointed right at the activists. And they rappelled from helicopters onto the ship. They arrested the entire crew, and they put them in jail for 2 months on charges of piracy and hooliganism. They were eventually granted amnesty and released, thankfully. But we're looking back a year now, and the film Black Ice looks at their story, but it also looks at the unfolding drama in the Arctic regions of the planet, and the region that's incredibly vulnerable, fragile, is hurting the most from climate change and is being exploited by oil companies.
Yeah, and now that the Arctic ice is vanishing, oil companies from several of the countries that surround the Arctic are saying, oh boy, we can do this.
Right.
Right. So what's the National Research Council, the arm of the National Academy of Sciences, has put out a report on this. What does that have to say?
Sure, yeah. Last April, the National Research Council of the Academies put out a report, actually partially co-sponsored by the American Petroleum Institute. I'm sure an organization you've talked about a lot on this program, that represents oil companies and lobbies in Washington for the weakest possible regulations on the oil industry. They actually are one of the co-sponsors of this report, and this report said, we don't know what to do about an oil spill in the Arctic. We don't have the infrastructure to respond to an oil spill, and we also just don't have the science to say that we could in any way clean it up. And of course, that's intuitive to the rest of us. We saw what happened in 2010 with the BP Deepwater disaster in the Gulf of Mexico. We've seen that oil still is in Prince William Sound from the Exxon Valdez, and we've seen the oil spills all across the planet. And of course, they can't be cleaned up. And in Arctic conditions, it's even worse. You have incredibly frigid water. You have ice moving in. It's iced over for most of the year. So imagine if at the end of the drilling season there was a big blowout on a rig up there. We wouldn't be able to clean it up. It would just stay up in the Arctic. And that's basically what this report said. And yet companies like Shell are still vying for access to the hydrocarbon reserves underneath the Arctic Ocean.
Yeah, amazing. Amazing. So where is Greenpeace going from here on all this?
Right. Well, we're monitoring the situation globally, but there's two really big things here. One is the territory that each of the Arctic nations controls. So in our case, in the United States, it's the Alaskan Arctic. It's the waters just off the North Slope of Alaska. We need those areas to be protected, and not drilled in. We can't afford to have the oil extracted there. We can't afford the possibility of an oil spill. And so we do need the Obama administration to take a hard look at that and realize and heed the warnings of the National Research Council and say, okay, this is far too dangerous. And we also can't afford it from a climate perspective. Another thing happening on Sunday is there's going to be the People's Climate March up in New York City, and this is going to be the most amazing, display of climate activism I think we've seen in this country and maybe around the world. It's going to be massive. People from all different walks of life and all over the country are converging on New York City to march in support of climate action as Ban Ki-moon holds a summit there, and he'll actually be joining the marchers we've just heard. And this is where people are at. People don't want to see more hydrocarbon extraction and fossil fuels. They want to see clean, renewable sources of energy. So drilling in the Arctic is an anathema to that. We need the Obama administration to heed those warnings.
Is there any indication that they are?
It's hard to tell right now. So what's happening with the Alaskan Arctic is Shell Oil has leases in the Arctic that were granted under the Bush administration, and they're currently tied up in court because the federal government actually messed up on their potential worst case scenario for an oil spill. Essentially, they said there was only a small amount of oil there, and it turns out there could be a lot more, and so they're having to go back and look at the environmental impact assessment. But I think we're going to see from that the impact is far too great to allow the approval of these leases. So the proof will be in the pudding when the Department of Interior makes its decision this winter on whether or not to approve those leases after doing a supplemental environmental impact statement.
Don't you think that this, along with the Keystone XL pipeline stuff, is basically the Obama administration is holding it until after the November elections, and nobody's really sure if they're holding it until after the elections because it's going to really anger the Republicans or whether it's going to really anger the Democratic base. But one or the other. Doesn't that seem to be the politics of the game that's being played out here?
Yeah, I think that's an astute assessment, and I keep worrying about President Obama's toe as he keeps kicking these cans. I'm worried he's going to bruise it. But I think with the Keystone XL pipeline, the can keeps getting kicked down the road, and it's a very obvious political decision, I think, being made there. And here with the Arctic, some of it's tied up in courts, but I think the politics are heavily influencing this, rather than looking at the science and the consensus of people who, we're in New York today delivering messages from over 6 million people around the world to Ban Ki-moon saying, we need to protect the Arctic, we need to set this place aside. And
in Alaska, you've got, because of melting permafrost, you got houses vanishing, sinkholes, all kinds of stuff. Oh, yeah. And yet the people benefit from the money from oil. We're pretty much out of time here, but John Deans, is the consensus, the political consensus in Alaska to drill or not to drill?
I think that remains to be seen. I think it's a very dangerous prospect, and especially for the subsistence cultures in the North Slope of Alaska and around the Arctic Circle who
are politically the least powerful, tragically. John Deans, the Arctic Campaign with Greenpeace USA, greenpeace.org/USA. Thank you, John.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.